Hello, you're listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. My name is Colby, and I'm the editor here at Patientworthy. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us once again today. We really appreciate it. And today we're going to be discussing mixed connective tissue disease, also known as MCTD. That's a rare autoimmune disease that, as the name suggests, targets the connective tissues of the body. Early symptoms include swollen fingers and hands, joint pain, rashes, and more. And overall, the condition has the signs of a combination of disorders such as lupus, scleroderma, and polymyositis, which can lead to delay in diagnosis and treatment. And to help in our discussion today, I'm happy to say we have a very special guest. Ronda Thorington is the mother of a child who was diagnosed with MCTD in 2011. Ronda is also a licensed professional counselor who specializes in empowering parents of children who are living with a rare or chronic diagnosis. Ronda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And to start with, would you mind providing more information for us about mixed connective tissue disease for listeners who may be unfamiliar?
Sure. Well, as you said, mixed connective tissue disease is a rare autoimmune disease. And the way that it was described to me that makes the most sense is an umbrella under which several autoimmune diseases fall. So when a person has mixed connective tissue disease, they can have symptoms of all kinds of other autoimmune diseases, such as they may get swollen joints, like people with rheumatoid arthritis might get. They may get swollen lymph nodes and glands. They may get vascular inflammation is seen in vasculitis. They may get inflamed muscles, as in polymyositis. So MCTD is the umbrella, and then all of these other symptoms fall underneath it, which can make it challenging because when one has a mixed connective tissue disease flare, it can look different every time. And that was our experience.
See, and your daughter was diagnosed with MCTD in 2011 when she was just 5 years old. At the time, what were some of the first signs to you that something was wrong?
Sure. So she woke up. I noticed when I was giving her a bath that she had a lot of bruises on her body. She was 4.5 at the time. And the bruises, it's not, atypical for a toddler to have bruises. And she was a kid that played really hard. But when I noticed bruises on her back, and then when she didn't remember how she got the bruises and they didn't seem to hurt her, that gave me cause for concern. So I took her to the pediatrician. They did blood work and her platelet count was around 10,000. And for anyone who's familiar, a normal platelet count is 100,000 or above. So hers was a tenth of that. So the pediatrician sent us to our local children's hospital, who she was diagnosed with ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, which means, low platelets of unknown origin. And they said, you know what, we're just going to watch her and let's see if her platelets rebound. And they did. But then within a couple months, she also developed some swollen glands. Her parotid glands swelled so much so that she couldn't turn her head. And she had hip pain. When I took her back to the doctor, they said, oh, well, you know what? She just must have gotten a virus. And I said, well, that doesn't really make sense. How could she have this ITP and then get a virus on top of that? So to make a long story short, we found our way to Boston Children's Hospital for a second opinion, and they did lots of testing. And, 6 months later, she was diagnosed with mixed connective tissue disease.
And after your daughter was diagnosed then with MCTD, and as you said, there were a few hitches along the way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of changes did your family have to make to help support her?
Mm-hmm. So, initially, of course, we rallied around her. There were lots of medical appointments. She decompensated relatively quickly. Within 6 months, she was having a lot of pain. And she was on, several different medications. Things seemed to happen at a rapid fire pace. She went from attending school every day, being very active, to being homebound. So changes for me were that I had to really step back from my psychotherapy practice. I was running a pretty successful and busy psychotherapy practice, so I had to step way back from that. spending lots of time at home with her and lots of medical appointments. We live about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes from Boston. So taking her sometimes weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, back and forth to Boston, times when we would have to spend the night, resulted in lots of challenges for our family. To further complicate things, we have two other children. My daughter, who has the autoimmune disease, she's in the middle. So she has a brother who's 21 months older than her and a younger sister who is 2.5 years younger than her. So actually, when my daughter got sick, I had a newborn. So I had a newborn and then I had a son who was in first grade. So it was incredibly challenging. So I had to take a step way back professionally. And that resulted in, financial challenges for our family, emotional challenges. And it was tough. It was really tough.
As you mentioned, your background is in counseling with an emphasis on parents and families. That's something you were already working with at the time. Did you find your new experiences with your daughter's diagnosis with MCTD and the sort of dynamics that brought into your family? How did that affect your work as a counselor, do you think?
So that's a really interesting question because I think that my training as a counselor helped me to be able to support our family. I was trained in trauma work. I was trained in attachment. So I was very aware of trauma, like how it manifested in children. So when my daughter began to experience symptoms of trauma, I was able to address it. I was able to get her, the assistance that I knew she needed. At the same time, though, I did not see, there were no mental health resources available for families who were experiencing what we experienced. So initially, when my daughter was diagnosed, of course, I'm scouring the internet, looking at, MCTD websites and trying to get information. But what I soon discovered is that, MCTD is rare. It's rarer still for a child to develop it. So there were no resources for children. I mean, there were resources for juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but nothing for MCTD. So she didn't fit in any neat box. So that was an incredible challenge and incredibly isolating. So, for our family, one of the things that we stressed, because in trauma work, we work a lot around, a normalcy, right? A lot of stuff is different, but let's also focus on the things that are the same. So we really became very vigilant on maintaining structure for her and the rest of our children, really finding joy in the moments where we could find joy, and also being able to laugh at the absurdity, because humor and laughter is a way to kind of mitigate some of that traumatic experience. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you bring up trauma there. This is a topic actually that we've discussed with other guests on the podcast before. This idea of medical trauma, something that almost everyone experiences in some way or another when they receive this type of diagnosis, whether that's a rare disease or a chronic disease. And I've always gotten the sense that it's an unanticipated aspect of this. They might be able to cope with the, physical relationship they're having with their body, the ways that is presenting itself, making itself known. But I'd like to get your perspective on this as a licensed therapist then. Can you expand on us? What exactly is medical trauma and how does this relate to this type of diagnosis?
It's a great question. So medical trauma is a trauma that is experienced as the direct result of a medical treatment. And I like to say it's a special kind of trauma because the very thing that you need to manage your health and make you better is the thing that's causing the trauma. And as a parent, to knowingly subject your child to that is really, it's just a whole nother level of cognitive dissonance. So here's a perfect example. When my daughter was first diagnosed and we went to the initial children's hospital, their philosophy was, we'll just watch and wait. So that meant taking her every week for her to get a blood draw. She was 4. So you can imagine what that was like. So they literally would wrap her in a blanket, multiple people would hold her down, and they would draw her blood. The entire time she's screaming, "Mommy, mommy, help me, help me." So, it just destroyed me. It completely broke my heart. And I remember there was one occasion where I had to bring her in, and I called my husband at work and I said, I can't do it. You have to come home and you have to go with us because I cannot do this again on my own. So she experienced trauma. I experienced trauma from that experience. I mean, I can still hear her voice like screaming for me to help her. And here we are like 12 years later. So I think the other piece about medical trauma is that when you look at traditional PTSD, it is a discrete event. With medical trauma, oftentimes it's ongoing. So you can't process it in the same way that you would a traditional PTSD. Not only is the trauma ongoing, but one of the things we work with people in traditional PTSD is one of the symptoms is hypervigilance. So we work with people to kind of be able to move past that and to not be hypervigilant of their surroundings or, what's going on so that they can live a fully functioning life. When you have a medical condition, hypervigilance is part of the game. Right. So you have to pay close attention to your system, to your body. You have to pay very close attention to what is going on because that is how you stay well, or that is how you can manage your health. So there's a lot of conflicting thoughts and actions that happen when you experience medical PTSD. So, and for my daughter specifically, going back to the blood, her getting weekly blood draws, the way it manifested for her is she became deathly afraid of dogs. Shortly after getting those weekly blood draws, she would have nightmares about lying down, being unable to move, and wolves biting her. So she couldn't scream for me. She had no voice. And thereafter, to this day, she's deathly afraid of dogs as a result. I mean, she's done a lot of work around it so she can at least be in a room with a dog now, but that's directly a result of that experience.
So the way this was manifesting in her mind at the time was that action sort of presented itself as dogs were attacking her in her dream.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
And so, of course, things like this, medical trauma, PTSD, this is only one aspect that a family has to deal with for a chronic or a rare condition. More generally speaking, can you talk about some of the unique challenges that families of children living with a rare or chronic diagnosis often face?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So families managing a child's rare or chronic diagnosis face oftentimes an increased level of stress, an increased level of anxiety. Just those primary relationships are often disrupted because so much attention, you only have a finite amount of time, attention, and energy. So when one of your children is sick, you give them a lot of your time, attention, and focus. So it doesn't leave a lot for those other relationships. So oftentimes, primary relationships suffer, marriages, lots of marriages end up in divorce when you're dealing with a child's medical diagnosis. You have siblings who can become, what we call parentified, in that they become little adults and they have to help and take care of, and their needs end up getting pushed to the side because the sibling with the condition is always the focus of attention. And so, these are kids that can grow up to be, incredible people pleasers and they often will dismiss their own needs to take care of others. So, that's just some of, what families deal with in general, as well as the financial piece. I can't stress that enough. The financial stressors of having to deal with, medications that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, travel, if you have to travel for your child to get treatment, as well as, if you have to leave your professional career to kind of deal with all of the medical issues. The other piece that families often, all families dealing with a rare or chronic disease have to manage is the grief. The grief of not having the family that you thought you would have, not having the child that you thought you would have. That's very real. And, often in my work with families, there's a lot of guilt around that. So, I always tell parents, you have permission to grieve. People feel like they don't have a right to grieve because, oh, well, my child is still alive. So what do I have to be upset about? Well, you have a lot to be upset about, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you hate your kid. It means that, this situation sucks, and that's okay.
Right. And how you come through all of these aspects into a new normal for yourself, too. One topic that we often discuss with parents of young children with rare or chronic conditions is that parents can struggle with the need to protect their child, obviously, depending on what their condition is, while also allowing them the room to grow and experience the world as any other kid would.
Mhm.
How did you approach this with your daughter?
We were very intentional with Rhea. To give you an example, I remember she used to have periods of time where she couldn't walk because she was in so much pain. And my mom came over to watch. She would help us with our kids. She would come over and watch them when we were able to go to work. And Rhea had left like a toy on the floor, some socks on the floor. She was probably like 7 or 8 years old. And my mom was like, oh, I'll pick it up because Rhea's having trouble walking. And I said, no, 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 no. She's going to pick it up. If she has to hop over there and get it, she's going to get it because she knows she's not supposed to leave her toys on the floor. No, she's going to have this for the rest of her life. She's got to figure out how to manage it, how to live her life in spite of this disease. And that has been our overarching philosophy with her. And, I tell her all the time, we can't take this away from you, but we can teach you how to live with it and still excel because of it. And, that's not easy. It's contradicting, like as a parent, because you want to keep your kid, you want to spare your kid any kind of discomfort. And so for many years, and it was a real struggle for us because I would find myself thinking, geez, I can't take this physical pain away from her, but I can make this part of her life easier. So I should be doing that. And then I would have to catch myself because, okay, I wouldn't do that for our other two children. And that's not going to benefit her as an adult. So why am I doing this now? So being very careful to not enable her and being careful to not allow her to use the disease as a reason why she couldn't do X, Y, and Z. And again, it wasn't always easy, but this kind of tough love at points in her life has served her well. She's a kid who went from being homebound from grades 2nd through 5th grade and having lots of academic challenges, short-term memory issues, to now she's the valedictorian of her high school class. She's graduating in 2 weeks as valedictorian. And part of that was having those discussions when she was 11 and 12 years old. Mommy, I don't think I can do it. Yes, you can. You're going to have to work harder than everybody else, but you can do it. So, yeah.
Well, graduation imminent. Congratulations to you and your daughter. I know that must have seemed like a long road at sometimes, given what you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. In our discussion before this call, you talked about one aspect that is near to your heart, and that's the idea that parents of a child living with a chronic illness often feel a time crunch. You kind of alluded to this earlier in some of the ways that manifests, but a time crunch when it comes to their own well-being specifically. Can you tell us why this is a crucial aspect for parents to come to terms with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So when we look at parents taking care of themselves, specifically their physical well-being and their emotional well-being, that helps their child. Taking care of self is taking care of your child. I can speak, from personal experience, feeling guilty around taking time for myself. Like, oh, how can I, go and have coffee with my girlfriend when my daughter is lying on the couch, too sick to go with her friends? But when I am in a better space emotionally, that helps me to be better able to be present for her. So, when I spend time, with my friends, when I, read a book, when I exercise, when I focus on my own medical appointments, that gives me the time, energy, space to be able to be there for her in a way where I'm not feeling low key resentful, in having to do so because I have taken time. And when we take care of ourselves, that also models for our children the importance of self care. So I can't talk to my daughter about the importance of drinking enough water, so that she doesn't have, crazy headaches after her IVIG infusions if I'm not drinking water. So, because our kids, they see that we model for them how to be. So that self-care is vitally, vitally important. And when you take the time, that makes you better able to be present for your kids.
Makes total sense. Another topic that you often talk about with parents, and you alluded to this a little while ago, has to do with interfamily dynamics, particularly how siblings communicate and interact with regards to the rare or the chronic condition. You talked about parentified children specifically a little while ago. Can you tell us some more about this? Another aspect of this too, I think, is giving non-rare children the time and space they need. Maybe you can just kind of talk around this topic.
Absolutely. So, what we know to be true about children is that when we don't share information with them, they will fill in the space with all kinds of fantastical theories and thoughts. So one of the most important thing to do when we look at those interfamily dynamics is to be able to have conversations with our children's siblings about what is going on in an age appropriate way. I think that what often happens is, parents with the best of intentions feel as if they are shielding their children from any kind of stress, any kind of distress and discord by not sharing information with them. But children always know. As a child therapist, I can't tell you how many times I would have a family come in and, there would be something going on. Maybe a family member is sick or parents are getting a divorce and they say, oh, well, Johnny has no idea what's going on. And then I bring Johnny in and we're talking one-on-one and Johnny's like, oh yeah, mommy and daddy fight all the time. And I heard them talking about getting a divorce and I'm so scared about that. So parents often feel like they're keeping something from their kids when in fact they aren't. And so one thing that children often will do is they will develop the belief that they have to be, if they were better, if they were kinder, if they were smarter, if they didn't give mommy and daddy a hard time, then things wouldn't be so stressful. Feeling as if they aren't allowed to have a bad day because mommy and daddy are dealing with so much with their sibling. So it is important to, number one, talk to kids again about what is going on in an age appropriate way, kind of uncover all of the thoughts that they're having, correct any kind of distortions they may have. I remember once with my son when he was on his way to bed, I would always stop in his room and we would talk and stuff. And he asked me, Mommy, is Rhea going to die? And I was like, oh my gosh, darling, no, where does that come from? He says, well, we had a relative who had just passed away. She had leukemia and she just passed away. And his response to me was, well, she goes to the hospital a lot and people die in the hospital. Auntie Brenda died and she went to the hospital a lot. So he kind of made this connection, this false connection that because his sister was going to the hospital, she too was going to die. And so he was carrying that around and, his little, 10-year-old body, carrying all that stress and anxiety. But if I hadn't had a conversation with him, he would have continued to carry that. So it's important to have the conversation, to uncover the distortions, to uncover the maladaptive thoughts and address them with your child. So also important that each child gets time with parents together and alone. And it doesn't have to be big time. It doesn't have to be, a trip. Oh, I'm just going to take Johnny to Disney World, just me and him, because we're going to have time one-on-one together. No, it could be a trip to the grocery store. I would, routinely grab one of my kids and say, come on, go with me. I want you to go to the grocery store with me because I want to have one-on-one time with you. I want to have special time. So we're walking up and down the aisles, just chit-chatting while I'm getting the groceries, which I would be doing anyway. But when you're able to identify it as special time, then the children recognize it as such. So on the flip side, you can do like the Disney World trip with Johnny. And then if you don't identify it as this is special time with me and Johnny, you're going to come back from Disney World. And 3 weeks later, he's going to be like, you never spent any time with me. So, so that's also, so that communication piece and that one-on-one is important. One of the things that I always tell parents when they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know, like, how do I have the conversation? I say, this is what you say. What kind of questions do you have about so-and-so's condition, about so-and-so's disease? Not do you have questions, but what kinds of questions do you have? Because then that gives them permission to say like anything that's on their mind, even if it's like, in their mind, if it's silly, if they feel like they can't ask it, if you ask them what kind of questions, then that gives them permission. So.
Because of course they have questions. They're watching and they're learning all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that's important too is to be honest. Oftentimes, parents will be like super stressed. And one of the things about, our rare and chronic siblings is they are super adept at reading us, reading our body language. They know when we're stressed. They know when we're sad. So if you're, come out your bedroom and you're all bleary-eyed because you've been crying in the shower and your child asks you, oh, mommy, why are you sad? And you say, I'm not sad. No, tell the truth. Like, I'm feeling a little sad today, but it's okay because, feelings change and I know I'll feel better, soon. So honesty is important.
Another thing that we know about living with a chronic illness or a rare illness is that it takes a village. What are some of the ways in which extended family or friends can get involved to help a family who's living with a rare or chronic diagnosis?
Good question. One of the things is to ask, what do you need? Not do you need anything? What do you need? You can do that. And then you can also, if you're having a conversation and someone is saying, man, I'm so overwhelmed because I got to cook dinner again tonight and I don't know what to make and I just don't have time, then don't even ask the question. Just send them some DoorDash. So, just thinking about, okay, what are some of the things that would help me in this circumstance? I have never had anyone just kind of do something for me and me think, well, geez, why would they do that? I've never had that experience. Oftentimes I've had, friends and family do things for me that I wouldn't think to ask for myself. But once they did it, I was like, my goodness, I am so thankful for this. Once upon a time, we like exploring like a gluten-free diet for my daughter. And it was like really hard finding gluten-free things that were palatable for her. And so I opened my door one day and one of my friends had left a basket of all these gluten-free goodies. Now, I wouldn't have ever thought to ask for that, but I was so thankful that she did that. And she didn't ask me if she could. She just dropped it off, so things like that, because I think when you ask, okay, do you need anything? Then that kind of puts the pressure on the person to come up with something or to say no. But when you can just kind of just step in and say, oh my goodness, I remember when I was talking to so-and-so, she was struggling she couldn't get out of the house to get herself a cup of Starbucks. So you know what? I'm a DoorDash her some Starbucks, or I'm just going to run over, give her some Starbucks and leave. One of the other things that I think family and friends can do is to reach out, even if you don't get a response. So I would often have, I had my core circle of friends. And when things were really unstable with my daughter, my friends would just send me texts or emails and they would say, you know what? You don't have to respond back to me. Just know that I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you and I'm sending this to you. But it's okay if you don't respond back because that takes the pressure off as well. Yeah. So I think that's how family and friends can help. The other thing too is, for rare families, if you do have a need, be real specific with others about how they can help. Like if you identify something that, needs to be done, instead of the blanket, well, yeah, I'd like you to come over and help. No, it's like, you know what? Can you come over on Tuesday at 4 o'clock and fold my laundry? Can you come over on Thursday at 5:45 and sit with so and so I can take a shower? So being really, really specific, because one of the things that I learned is that, friends and family do want to help, but oftentimes they don't know how.
Yeah, all great advice. Thank you. Finally, returning closer to your own family's situation, what advice do you have for parents who might have a child that's recently been diagnosed with mixed connective tissue disease or one of those umbrella conditions within it?
Well, first, I would tell people to just take a breath. Just take a breath because it can be incredibly shocking and saddening and infuriating. So it's okay to just take a step back and take a breath. Secondly, I would encourage people to do their research and find providers that are knowledgeable about this condition, any kind of, rare condition. Make sure you find a provider that is knowledgeable in that, preferably someone who's a researcher. The rarer the disease, the more you want someone who does research around this disease, because they are going to be aware of like the cutting edge treatments that are available. And with that, in finding a provider, I'll also encourage people to find a provider with whom they can partner, because it is a relationship. And just like any relationship, you have to partner with someone who's going to listen to you, who's going to value you, and who is going to be respectful of you. So, and your child. So if you don't have that, it is okay to move on to someone with whom you do have that kind of relationship. So, I would also tell families, you know what? It's going to be okay. It is going to be okay. It is going to be a long road. It's going to be a bumpy road, but it's going to be okay. And there's still joy to be had. Still joy to be had.
Well, if someone wants to learn more about your work in helping to support families through rare or chronic diagnoses, what's the best place for them to do that?
So people can find me on my website, resilientparentconsulting.com. You can also find me on social media at Ronda Thorington Parent Coach. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find me under Ronda Thorington Parent Coach there. And I work with families one-on-one that have a child diagnosed with a rare chronic condition. I also work in groups doing workshops and webinars for groups. And I also consult with organizations that either need help around supporting parents and caregivers with rare disease or, training in how to work with parents and caregivers with rare disease. So I work with parents one-on-one that have a child diagnosed with a rare chronic condition. I also work in groups. Sometimes organizations will contract with me to work with groups of parents and caregivers to help support them. And I also do consultation work with organizations to help train their staff around how to support parents and caregivers of children with rare and chronic disease. So
Okay. Well, Rhonda, thank you so much for taking the time today to come on the show and to speak with our audience. We really appreciate you sharing your story and the great work that you're doing helping to support and empower families.
thank you so much, Colby. It's great to be here.
Right. And if you'd like to get in touch with Rhonda at her Resilient Parent Consulting website or through social media, we'll leave links in the show notes for this episode so that you can check those out. And remember, you can always keep up with the latest in rare disease news by visiting our website at patientworthy.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more by searching for Patient Worthy on those platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribing ensures you'll automatically receive our new monthly episodes as soon as they come out, and a review or rating really does go a long way toward helping us out. Finally, if you have any questions about the podcast or perhaps an idea for a future episode, you can get in touch with me by sending an email to Colby, that's COLBY, @patientworthy.com. That does it for today's episode. Thank you once again to Ronda Thorington for joining me on the show today. And as always, thank you for listening.